The year is 2026. Supermarket shelves stand bare, families struggle, and the cost of living has skyrocketed. Is this crisis a result of natural phenomena or a deliberate strategy by powerful entities? Visit our website for more information and join our community for updates and discussions. This is the Crisis and Control Report, where we expose mechanisms of control with knowledge. The world produces enough food to feed everyone, yet millions go hungry. This isn't just about natural causes. It's about the deliberate manipulation of food systems for profit and control. A few multinational corporations dominate the global food system, prioritizing corporate interests over the needs of the many, creating a centralized and vulnerable system. Four corporations, 𝐥𝐤𝐤𝐤, 𝐸𝐸, and Louis Dreyfus, control over 70% of the global grain trade, manipulating markets and prioritizing profits over people. Agrochemical giants like Monsanto and Syngenta dominate the seed market, replacing traditional seeds with GMOs and exerting strict intellectual property rights, threatening biodiversity and food sovereignty. The illusion of choice in supermarkets masks the reality of a market controlled by a few multinational corporations, prioritizing profit over nutrition and well-being. The world produces enough food, yet over 800 million people go hungry. This manufactured crisis is driven by inequality and a system designed to enrich the powerful. Food has been used as a weapon throughout history, and today, food aid and trade policies continue to be tools of control and oppression. The journey of food from farm to plate is entangled in global finance, where speculators on Wall Street can have as much impact on food prices as farmers and weather patterns. The narrative we've unveiled so far might seem bleak, a tapestry woven with threads of corporate greed, political manipulation, and systemic injustice. But despair is not an option. The very fact that we are becoming aware of these deeply entrenched systems of control is a sign of hope, a testament to the power of knowledge and the potential for change. The food crisis, manufactured as it may be, is not an insurmountable challenge. It is a call to action, a rallying cry for a more just and equitable food system. The first step towards change is awareness. Share this video, spread the word, and ignite conversations about the hidden forces shaping our plates. Challenge the dominant narrative that portrays hunger as an inevitable consequence of scarcity. Expose the lie that corporate control is the only viable path to feeding the world. The more people understand the true nature of the food crisis, the more empowered we become to demand better, to demand change. This is not just about individual choices, it's about collective action. Support organizations fighting for food justice, advocate for policies that empower small farmers, and hold corporations and governments accountable for their role in perpetuating this broken system. Demand transparency in food labeling, push for investments in sustainable agriculture, and join the growing movement for food sovereignty. The right of people to define their own food systems based on principles of justice, sustainability, and democratic control. The future of our food system hangs in the balance. The choices we make today will determine whether we continue down a path of corporate control and manufactured scarcity, or forge a new path, one where food is recognized as a fundamental human right, where small farmers are valued, where biodiversity flourishes, and where everyone, regardless of their income or zip code, has access to healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. The power to change this narrative lies not in the hands of the few, but in the collective will of the many. Join the movement, break the chains of food control, and reclaim our right to nourish ourselves and our communities. The invisible hand that starves IMF, World Bank, and the globalization of hunger. While multinational corporations often take center stage in the narrative of food system control, Lurking in the shadows are institutions of even greater influence. The International Monetary Fund, or IMF, and the World Bank, these seemingly benign pillars of the global economic order tasked with promoting financial stability and development, have in reality played a pivotal role in shaping agricultural policies that have deepened the food crisis, particularly in the global south. Founded in the aftermath of World War II, the IMF and World Bank initially focused on rebuilding war-torn Europe. However, their mandate soon expanded to encompass the developing world, offering loans and financial assistance to newly independent nations struggling to find their footing in the post-colonial era. These loans, however, came with strings attached. Strings that would have profound and often devastating consequences for the food security of millions. Under the banner of Structural Adjustment Programs, or SAPs, the IMF and World Bank imposed a set of neoliberal economic policies on borrowing countries. These policies, rooted in the belief that free markets and trade liberalization were the keys to prosperity, mandated a series of reforms, including cutting agricultural subsidies, focusing on cash crops for export, and opening markets to foreign agribusiness. Developing countries were pressured to reduce or eliminate government support for small farmers, leaving them vulnerable to fluctuations in global commodity prices. Countries were encouraged to prioritize the production of cash crops, such as coffee, cocoa, and cotton, for export to developed countries, often at the expense of food crops for local consumption. Trade barriers were dismantled, allowing heavily subsidized agricultural products from developed countries to flood local markets, undercutting small farmers and undermining domestic food production. These policies, while often presented as technical adjustments, were in essence a form of economic colonialism, forcing developing countries to reorient their economies to serve the interests of wealthy nations and multinational corporations. The consequences for food security were dire. From food sovereignty to debt dependency, the price of development. The impact of these structural adjustment programs was swift and brutal. As government support for small farmers dwindled and cheap imports flooded local markets, millions of farmers across the global south were driven off their land and into poverty. Unable to compete with the subsidized products of industrial agriculture, they were forced to abandon their traditional livelihoods, migrating to urban slums in search of work, further straining already overburdened cities. The promise of development through trade liberalization proved to be a mirage. Instead of fostering self-sufficiency and prosperity, the policies imposed by the IMF and World Bank led to a deepening cycle of debt and dependency. Countries saddled with unsustainable debt burdens were forced to divert scarce resources away from essential services such as healthcare and education to service their loans, further exacerbating poverty and inequality. The erosion of food sovereignty, the right of people to define their own food systems, became a defining feature of this new global order. Countries once capable of feeding their populations found themselves reliant on food imports. Their food security held hostage to the vagaries of global markets and the geopolitical interests of donor nations. The consequences of this shift were profound, not only for the physical health of populations, but also for their cultural identity and social fabric. Traditional food systems, deeply intertwined with local knowledge, cultural practices, and community resilience, were dismantled, replaced by a homogenized industrial model that prioritized profit over people and the planet. Sowing the seeds of dissent. When policies spark unrest, the social and political ramifications of these IMF and World Bank policies were not lost on the people most affected. Across the global south, from the streets of Port-au-Prince to the rice paddies of Indonesia, a wave of protests and uprisings erupted in response to rising food prices, land grabs by foreign corporations, and the dismantling of local food systems. The 2007 to 2008 global food crisis, sparked by a confluence of factors, including drought, speculation in commodity markets, and the diversion of food crops for biofuel production, brought these tensions to a boiling point. Food riots erupted in over 30 countries, from Haiti to Bangladesh, Egypt to Senegal, as people took to the streets to demand affordable food and an end to policies that were driving them deeper into hunger. These protests, often met with brutal repression by governments seeking to maintain order, were a stark reminder that hunger is not merely a technical issue to be addressed through economic models and policy prescriptions. It is a deeply political issue, inextricably linked to questions of power, justice, and the right to a dignified life. The message from the streets was clear. The current global food system, with its emphasis on corporate control, financialization, and the relentless pursuit of profit, is unsustainable and unjust. It is a system that is failing to feed the world while simultaneously fueling inequality, conflict, and environmental degradation. Section 4. Beyond the balance sheet, the human cost of financialization. The food crisis at its core is not about a lack of food, but a lack of humanity. It is a crisis born of a system that values profit over people, greed over justice, and the dictates of the market over the basic needs of humanity. It is a system where food is reduced to a commodity, its true value obscured by balance sheets and financial instruments. The human cost of this financialization of food is immeasurable. It is etched on the faces of malnourished children, their bodies ravaged by hunger, their futures dimmed by the lack of proper nutrition. It is reflected in the despair of farmers forced to abandon their land, their livelihoods shattered by policies designed to benefit the few at the expense of the many. It is a cost measured not only in hunger and deprivation, but also in the erosion of community, the loss of cultural heritage, and the deepening of social and political divisions. When food becomes a source of anxiety, a tool of control, or a weapon of war, it undermines the very fabric of society, sowing seeds of discord and despair. The time has come to move beyond the cold calculations of the market and recognize the inherent right of every human being to food, not as a privilege to be earned, but as a fundamental entitlement. It is time to reclaim our food systems from the grip of corporate control and financial speculation and rebuild them based on principles of justice, sustainability, and the inherent dignity of all people. If you found this information valuable and believe it's important for others to know, please subscribe, share, and hit the notification bell. Controlled scarcity, the architecture of power. Throughout history, the powerful have understood a fundamental truth. Control over resources equals control over people. When access to basic necessities like food is scarce and precarious, it breeds dependence and compliance. This principle, known as controlled scarcity, underpins the very structure of the global food system, shaping not only what we eat, but also how we live, think, and interact with the world around us. The concept of scarcity itself is often manipulated, a narrative carefully crafted to justify inequality and maintain the status quo. We are told that there simply isn't enough to go around, that hunger and deprivation are inevitable consequences of a world with finite resources and growing populations. This narrative, however, ignores a fundamental truth. The world produces more than enough food to feed everyone. The problem is not one of scarcity, but of distribution, access, and the deliberate withholding of resources for profit and control. Controlled scarcity operates on multiple levels. It manifests in the form of land grabs by multinational corporations, displacing small farmers and concentrating control over fertile land in the hands of a few. It plays out in trade policies that favor export-oriented agriculture over local food production, rendering countries dependent on foreign imports and vulnerable to price shocks. And it is reinforced by a financialized food system that treats food as a commodity to be speculated on, driving up prices and making access to sustenance a matter of economic privilege rather than a basic human right. This system of control is not accidental, it is by design. It is a system that benefits those in power, allowing them to maintain their grip on wealth and resources while keeping the masses in a state of precarity and dependence. By controlling access to food, they control our very livelihoods, our health, and ultimately our freedom. The digital panopticon from food stamps to food IDs. As technology advances at an unprecedented pace, so too do the tools of control. The digital revolution, hailed by many as a force for democratization and empowerment, is rapidly being harnessed to reinforce existing power structures and extend the reach of surveillance into every aspect of our lives. The food system is no exception. In countries across the globe, digital systems are being implemented to track, monitor, and ultimately control access to food. From biometric identification systems linked to food aid programs to blockchain-based platforms that trace the movement of food from farm to consumer, the digitalization of the food system is rapidly transforming the relationship between citizens and their sustenance. While proponents of these technologies tout their potential to increase efficiency, reduce waste, and enhance food safety, critics warn of the dangers of creating a system where access to food is contingent on constant surveillance and compliance with government regulations. The potential for abuse is vast, with governments and corporations able to exert unprecedented control over what people eat, how much they consume, and even what kind of dietary choices they make. Imagine a world where your access to food is linked to your digital identity, your dietary choices tracked and monitored, your consumption patterns analyzed and judged. Imagine a world where your ability to feed yourself and your family is dependent on your compliance with government mandates, your social credit score, or your adherence to a prescribed set of nutritional guidelines. This is not science fiction, it is the dystopian reality that awaits us if we fail to challenge the increasing digitalization and control over our food system. Seeds of resistance, visions of abundance. The picture we have painted thus far may seem bleak, a dystopian vision of a world where food is a tool of oppression and our plates are dictated by corporate greed and government control. But despair is not an option. Amidst the corporate consolidation, the financial speculation, and the digital enclosures, a spirit of resistance is brewing, a growing movement for food sovereignty and a more just and sustainable food system. Around the world, communities are reclaiming their food systems, rejecting the industrial model of agriculture and embracing the principles of agroecology, permaculture, and food justice. Small farmers, once marginalized and ignored, are at the forefront of this movement, reclaiming their ancestral knowledge, preserving biodiversity, and building resilient local food systems that prioritize people and the planet over profit. From the seed libraries preserving heirloom varieties to the food cooperatives challenging the dominance of supermarket chains, from the community kitchens providing nutritious meals to those in need to the activists demanding fair trade policies and an end to land grabbing, a new food system is emerging. One rooted in principles of solidarity, sustainability, and the belief that access to food is a fundamental human right. This is not just about changing the way we eat, it's about changing the way we live. It's about building a world where everyone has access to healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. A world where food is a source of nourishment, connection, and celebration, not a tool of oppression or a weapon of control. It's about reclaiming our food systems, our health, our communities, and ultimately our future. Reclaiming our plates, reclaiming our future. The journey through the labyrinthine corridors of the global food system has exposed a stark and unsettling reality. Our plates, once symbols of nourishment and communal gathering, have become battlegrounds in a struggle for control, manipulated by corporate greed, entangled in geopolitical maneuvering, and increasingly subject to digital surveillance. The crisis we face is not one of scarcity, but of justice. A crisis manufactured by a system that prioritizes profit over people, consolidation over diversity, and control over freedom. Yet even amidst the bleakness, seeds of hope are being sown. Across the globe, a burgeoning movement is challenging the status quo, reclaiming the narrative of food and forging a path towards a more just and sustainable future. From the farmers' fields to the halls of government, from community gardens to digital platforms, a chorus of voices is demanding change, demanding a food system that nourishes, sustains, and empowers rather than exploits, depletes, and controls. The path forward is clear. We must dismantle the systems of control that have hijacked our food supply, exposing the hidden mechanisms of power and challenging the narratives that perpetuate inequality and injustice. We must break the grip of corporate monopolies, rewrite the rules of global trade, and reclaim our democratic right to define our own food systems based on principles of sustainability, equity, and local control. This is not merely a fight for food. It is a fight for our future. It is a fight for the health of our bodies, the well-being of our communities, and the ecological integrity of our planet. It is a fight for the right to nourish ourselves and future generations with dignity, justice, and a deep respect for the interconnectedness of all life. Let us rise to the challenge, reclaim our plates, and in doing so, reclaim our future. This is the Crisis and Control Report, where we expose the mechanisms of control with knowledge. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe.